My name is Richard Gray. I brought some family with me to clap for me. I am the Director of Community Organizing and Engagement for the Annenberg Institute for School Reform that's based at Brown University. I'm in the New York City office, and I want to introduce our panelists who will come out here. I'm going to need to put my glasses down because I have 53-year-old eyes. First, I'd like to introduce Anarima Bragava. Damon Jones. Charlisha Cumberbatch. And Norm Lewis. I see you got some fans here too. So I'm supposed to set the context for this, and it's billed as a panel, but I think in the tradition of, in the context here, it's really more people giving testimony, telling about what's important to them on this issue, and I'm going to start by setting the context. First, I want to say that I am passionately and unapologetically Black. And why that doesn't define me in a singular way. You can't define me without putting Blackness in it. And I say that because I want to be able to say in this context that I am passionately and unapologetically a supporter of Black Lives Matter. And the reason that I'm a supporter is because when I look at the resistance to just the phrase, that's evidence of the need for your existence. But more importantly, as a 53-year-old Black man who's not the same Black man at 53 that I was at 20. Because if you are, you're just not paying attention. I want to commend Black Lives Matter for changing the dialogue. You have shifted the concept of sexuality and masculinity. You have expanded the definition of what it means to be Black. And that's an important part of being able to change cultures. You have to change paradigms in the way people think about themselves and the way you think about yourself. And I think the important thing is that this is not just about police and communities, but it's expanded to issues of de-incarceration. And for me as an educator, for the idea of the role of even police in education, so there are broader conversations that we need to be a part of. And I think it's also important that this is being done by artists. Artists don't just sing and dance, they change minds and the visions of what can be. And so it's important that be a part of the conversation. But most importantly, and getting outside of this, I am a father of a 15-year-old boy. Now, I define my life by before and after Peyton was born. And when Peyton was born, I always tell people that I knew I would love him, and I prayed to God that I would like him. And I do. But the thing that caught me was when he was born, and they had him in this pan that looked like a hamburger warmer at McDonald's. And he was butt naked, and he looked up at me, and he couldn't talk, but his eyes told me something. He looked at me and said, I don't know who you are, but you look like you care about me. Can you get me a blanket, a beanie, or something? And I remember feeling this, can somebody get my son, cover him up, he needs a blanket, he needs a hat. And I realized from that day forward, the emotion that governs me is this gut-wrenching sense of responsibility for his life. And so you go into the house and you child-proof, you put things in them, but you cannot child-proof the world. And every day I send my son into the city of New York with the fear of what might happen to him. So this is not just about policy. This is not just about a movement that is about changing culture. It is about the kind of relationship and conversation I have with my son about why his life matters. The same conversation I have with you. And so this is not just a movement of collection of people, but it is personal and about relationships and about our relationship to people before us and after us. And so I'm going to go to our panel and ask them to give their own testimony about these issues and why it's important. And they're going to speak from their own experience, but they're also going to talk a little bit about why they're here in this particular moment. And we're going to start with you. And introduce who you are as well.
Sure. Good evening. My name is Anurima Bhargava, and I spent much of the last 6 years in the Justice Department in the Civil Rights Division. And I'm here to talk about places that are all too familiar to all of you. Let me start with Ferguson, Missouri, where we all know about the moment of violence and the moments of violence, but I want to talk about the everyday violence that people in the communities that are like Ferguson, which is many of the communities that we all live in around the country, are experiencing every day. And those moments of violence, those everyday violences, are things like what it feels like to get stopped and get 13 tickets on a stop or 10 tickets on a stop and not have any chance of being able to pay those tickets. And so those tickets become a path to jail. And they become a path to jail where you still can't pay those fines and you can't find a way out of that. And that is what happened to many of the people that are part of the community in Ferguson every day. It is the story of a 6-year-old who sat across from me. And it's a 6-year-old who could be a young Frank Roberts, it could be a young DeRay McKesson, who was high-fiving everybody after a 3-hour community meeting that we were having. And his grandparents were talking to my colleague, and I asked my colleague, why are they here? And he said it was September 27th of 2014. He said they're here because their grandson is in first grade, and he's already been suspended twice this year. And in kindergarten, he was suspended 15 times. And I looked at that young little boy who was sitting across from me after 3 hours, and I thought to myself, none of my friends, none of the kids who I'm around would have been able to sit there without saying, I'm hungry, I'm tired, I want to go home. Why are you talking to these people? And that young little boy, what kind of relationship does he have to authority? What kind of relationship does he have of trust to the people who are there to support him and to educate him? It is the story of, let me take you to another place that you are all too familiar with, North Baton Rouge or Staten Island, where people are being violated, killed for trying to make a living. And why is that? Because people like Eric Gardner or Alton Sterling, after having gone through a system that might have started out with some fines and fees from a traffic ticket, are now in a situation where they don't have another way in which they can make a living. Because of a felony conviction, they can't actually get out into the world and make a living the way that all the rest of us can in so many of the states around this country. And it takes me to a place, again, all too familiar to all of you, Sanford, Florida. And this is to the ways in which our communities today are so intensely segregated. The Sanford, Florida, like many parts of this country, went through a process of desegregating, and then it went through a rapid process of resegregating. So we are now at a point in our country where our communities are as segregated as they were in 1970. And that is by race, that is by class, and that is by all the ways in which we find ourselves divided. And in that moment, how is it that George Zimmerman, though I'll say I'm not sure George Zimmerman is a good example of anything, right? But George Zimmerman and Trayvon Martin can look at each other as anything other than someone who they fear versus someone that they have some knowledge of or can respect. And those are the kinds of systemic ways in which every day there are violences being committed in communities around this country against Black people. And that is a way in which I think we get to the point of the incredible violence that we're seeing around the country today. The last thing I'll say is as I stand on the stage among this beautiful, magical group of artists, I would say to all of us who aspire to be artists that we can, because as art, we can all be artists, because we can recreate ourselves in our communities every day. So I hope we can join together in creating a very different art and movement in this country to address the kinds of things that we're seeing in the civil rights movement and the human rights movement in the Justice Department every day.
us to share from your own experience.
Well, good evening. My name is Damon from the New York representative of Black Law Enforcement. I've been working in the Westchester County Department of Corrections for the last 2017. And I am black before I was black. Down to the core. And let's remember, the police department was created on the oppression of the free Africans and African slaves. So let's not forget that. We must have that in our conversation. And let's stop saying police brutality and start saying police criminality. We must change that language. And why do I say that? Because the police officer is trained by the state. He gets a certificate from the state. The police officer has to follow policies and procedures, which is what? Paid by you, the taxpayer. And if that officer goes into the community and violates his training, his policies and procedures, he is no less than a criminal himself. So we must understand that, and we must look at that. So Black Lives Matter. Black Lives Matter is really community policing. It's the best form of community policing because it's the black community is saying that we want policing that's going to respect our community. See, the black community is the only community in the United States that has no say in how their community is policed. You have commissioners telling you how they're going to police your community. No, community policing is the community taking charge in policies, procedures, hiring practices, who they hire. We're just not going to look for officers of color. We got to look for officers of conscience. And that's what's missing. There's an old saying, just because you're my skin folk don't mean you're my kin folk. Because the black officers outnumbered the police department. So they say, why do you have blacks in law? Why do you have a black law enforcement organization? I said, because you already have your white one, and that's the police departments throughout the United States. So we have to have a black law enforcement organization to have conversation within black law enforcement so they can understand. See, we feel the racism in the police department, and we get it both ways. Because you got to understand, in New York State, there's been 27 incidents of black law enforcement on duty in plain clothes or off duty have been shot by their white counterparts. It has never happened in the reverse. You will never find a black uniform cop shoot at a plain clothes white cop. Why? Because he's already perceived as the law. See, when we're in plain clothes, we're perceived as Trayvon Martin. So we understand that Black Lives Matter because even black law enforcement lives do not matter in this system of policing. So we have to change.
Charge of our families, we're not in charge of our communities, we're not in charge of our homes. In my work, a lot of the crimes that I see, or the crimes that I see, it's what we call poverty crimes. And what that means is it's pretty much something that someone has committed because they couldn't afford something that we all have basic rights to, such as food, clothing, turnstile, junk, you know what I mean? It's things like this that we're seeing so many people being brought into our offices for. And that's problematic because we should own our communities. We shouldn't have an organization, an outside organization coming into our communities, telling us how to raise our children, what to do with our families, how we're allowed to obtain our food, things of that nature. Our history with policing doesn't permit that. As you know, or as someone has mentioned already, that the history of policing shows that at some point, police were here just so that they could look after property of others, property of white people, right? That was us. We were property at one point. How can this system perpetuate? We need a brand new system, and that comes down to our community. We have to get in charge of ourselves. We have to organize. We have to build. We really need to build. We need to her child was removed and she was arrested. We can't let this happen in our communities. So we do need to open ourselves up for these conversations. We need to talk to one another. We need to organize. Organization is key so that we can regain autonomy if we've had any, so that we can gain agency. I think right now, our primary focus should be speaking with one another, loving one another, feeling for one another, being a community.
I'm not going to down you out, but Sister Charlize, she was nervous about this. But I think she did all right. My heart and everything to be all right. She did just that. Brother Norm, you bring it home.
Well, I mean, I'm just honored to be on this panel with Intelligentsia. Like, I played somebody on TV, but I just, that story you just said about the chicken, that reminds me of the play Les Miserables. He went to feed this is, but I just know, I grew up in a small town called Eatonville, Florida, right outside of Orlando. And the oldest black chartered municipality in the United States. Thank you. Anyway, but growing up in that space, it was interesting because Orlando North is Alabama and Georgia just extended. Orlando South is kind of an amalgam of like a lot of the northern folks who moved down there. So I had the best of both worlds. I didn't really experience racism, blatant racism, until I was around 16 years old when someone called me a nigger. And I'm saying it because I'm taking power with this network. But it hurt my heart. I had to protect my friends because they were white and Spanish. But I went home and cried. But I remember also growing up that being a lawyer, being a doctor, being a policeman, and being a fire chief were really respected professions. And they would come and speak to you at your schools. And I just don't feel that respect anymore for some reason from the police. There seems to be no accountability. I know that, I'm not sure, I would like to ask you, if there's after like 2 years, you have to take a test again. Do you have to do calisthenics? Because sometimes we see some of these guys in Midtown, and they don't look like they can get to it. So, I just really feel like, I know that firemen have to take tests, they have to be in shape to help you out. There should be that same requirement. And like Julissa was just saying, I think that we need to take our community. We need to just police ourselves, go and invest in banks. That's where the real power is. And that's kind of all I have to say. But I'm so honored to be here. And Black Lives, the squeaky wheel will be heard. I guess that's the right term. I don't know. Close enough. That's close enough. Let's just keep being squeaky. That's all.
Representative expertise, but to start a conversation that we should keep going. That we need to have more conversations that change the dialogue. And I think most importantly, we need to remember that our issues matter, that our voices matter, and we need to be creating the spaces that allow this to happen. So, as we said in the beginning, this is not the end of a conversation, this is the beginning, and we hope that you all will join us in that as well. Thank you very much.